Hello and welcome to Jay Coletti's Racket Reviews. My name is Jay Coletti, and I will be your hostess. Here on Racket Reviews, we are dedicated to learning about all things organized crime, and today I'm really looking forward to wrapping up our conversation about the Detroit Partnership by taking you all the way from the history of the end of Prohibition into modern day. It's going to be quite the ride. If you're enjoying the channel and would like to become a Racket Reviews patron, please head on over to the Patreon account and join the Coletti family. Now, without further ado, we have much to discuss, so let's get right to it. Let's begin with a quick recap of our last episode. After finally settling the tensions between the Gianola and Vitale conflict, Angelo Melli, with the help of others, specifically Salvatore Catalanotte, head of the Detroit Unione Siciliana, the various factions of Detroit had come together to make money from Prohibition in what became known as the Pascuzzi Combine. Catalanotte would be elevated to the status of boss and would run the partnership smoothly for 9 years. He was well respected and capable. This combine would be bent but not broken after a federal raid in 1929 and would have likely survived had its leader not passed away the next year. Catalanotte died in 1930 due to complications from pneumonia and influenza, making him the first mob boss in Detroit's history to die of natural causes instead of being murdered or forced out of power. After his death, the Combine would start to crumble and eventually just completely dissolve. Of the men Melli worked with for this peace agreement, including Catalanotte, Joe Zerilli, Bill Tocco, John Prizziola, Peter Licavoli, and Chester Lamare, only 2 of them would not make it into the modern era of the partnership and be part of the partnership's Council of 5 leadership. Those 2 men were Salvatore Catalanotte, although he no doubt would have been part of the partnership's leadership if he had survived, and Chester Lamare, who also wouldn't survive into the modern era, but would be murdered as a result of his betrayal. Gaspare Milazzo, who would briefly take over as boss following Catalanotte's death, had been a mobster in several states including New York, New Jersey, and California. He would settle in Detroit and begin cashing in on the major business of Prohibition by running an illegal booze operation behind his grocery store. While he had been in New York, Milazzo had worked under Nico Schiro, a New York boss who had been a rival to Joe Miseria, recently crowned the boss of bosses. Schiro would pass his family to Salvatore Maranzano. Miseria and Maranzano would find themselves locked in a huge struggle for power from 1930 to 1931, known as the Castellamarese War. This Mafia war, however, would extend far beyond the borders of New York City, because all the mafiosi associated with Miseria or Maranzano were connected by way of interstate commerce, which, by the way, at that time, during Prohibition, was never higher. Chester Lamare, who at this point was still technically part of the Detroit coalition with Melli and the rest, had already been in cahoots with Miseria in New York. Miseria knew that if he was going to have a foothold in Detroit, which again was right on that Canadian border and vastly important to the distribution of illegal booze, specifically in the western United States, he could not have any competition with Maranzano lest Detroit be torn apart like New York. Milazzo, who had been a loyalist to Schiro and Maranzano, could not be allowed to continue running the city. Miseria needed one of his loyalists to be boss of Detroit, and he chose Lamare. Per Miseria's instruction, Lamare arranged for the murder of Milazzo, his colleague Sam Perino, and his advisor, Angelo Melli. The setup was to meet at a fish market for an alleged regional boss meeting. On May 31, 1930, the fish market murders, as they came to be known, resulted in the deaths of Sam Perino and Gaspare Milazzo. Angelo Melli had made the wise decision not to attend. Lamare would become the boss of Detroit with Miseria's blessing, but it would immediately throw the city back into turmoil. Upon hearing about the murders of Perino and Milazzo, Melli got to work orchestrating the death of Lamare. Detroit was so hot for Lamare that he ended up ruling Detroit remotely and moving to New York City for a little while. In February of 1931, Lamare moved back to his home in Detroit. On February 7th, 1931, by the way, in my last episode, I believe I said 1930, I meant 1931. Chester Lamare would be murdered in his home after welcoming in a guest. It would seem that this guest must have been someone he knew and trusted, as Lamare would not have let anyone into his home while he was a target of so much Mafia ire. Lamare was mistaken about the relationship between himself and the guest, however, because this guest would end their visit by putting 2 bullets in his head and killing him. Bill Tocco and Joe Zerilli were brought in for questioning about the murder, but sufficient evidence was never provided and the 2 were let off the hook. After Lamare's death, the partnership returned to a state of unification, and Bill Tocco stepped into the role of leadership. He would be boss for 6 years before stepping down into the role of underboss and allowing Zerilli to take over in 1936. Technically, the 2 men, friends, cousins, and brothers-in-law, would work as co-bosses throughout the majority of their time together. And that's where we're going to pick up our episode today. As always, if that's still a little fuzzy for you or you need a reminder, check out the previous episodes to get up to speed as to where we are now, but for today, let's keep moving forward. We see the leadership of Bill Tocco and Joseph Zerilli from the 1930s into the 1970s. They had one of the longest runs in not only Detroit, but Mafia history, and it's easy to see why. They mobilized and got Detroit back on track with a unified family. Unlike many other Sicilian factions, this coalition was nearly impossible to get into unless you were directly related or married into the family. Getting made in the Detroit Partnership was like getting into the Israeli land laws enumerated in Leviticus 25. You either had to have provable kinship, or you were out. It was also under the leadership of Zerilli and Tocco that the Council of Five finally got established. These men, also including Melli, Prizziola, and Licavoli, would be the decision-makers for the partnership and would keep their cards close to their chest. In addition to the kinship rules, the partnership had further protection by not allowing members to mix their tasks. If you were in the drug trade, for example, you would not find yourself involved in labor rackets. Licavoli was the primary link to the rum-running Jewish Purple Gang during this time, and they would find that it was a very lucrative collaboration. Unlike other mafias, however, the partnership would not be interested in absorbing the Purple Gang. They were associates only. During the initial takeover of the Zerilli-Tocco co-headship in the 1930s, a young James Hoffa was organizing his first strike at a Kroger grocery store in the city. By the way, Kroger still has a union today. It's called the United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW, and as recently as 2019, the union in New York had the following mob-related charges. Steven Arena, Genovese soldier, was charged with racketeering and conspiracy. Frank Conietta, of the Genoveses and a former secretary-treasurer of the UFCW Local 1D, along with Vincent Diocunto Jr., a Genovese associate, union official, and former secretary-treasurer of UFCW Local 2D, were also charged in the indictment. All pleaded guilty. Additionally, Frank Giovinco, also of the Genovese family, was found guilty of racketeering and conspiracy. All of this to say that union tampering is still one of the top ways that we see mafia influence today. The UFCW is one of many unions charged with such crimes within the last few years, and New York is not the only state. Unions are also very useful in that there are so many people involved. They weigh in on elections, they can stifle competition by competitive regulation measures, they can push for legislation, and of course, are hubs for racketeering. That's why the Detroit Partnership, along with every single mafia in all of the cities we have covered so far, and all the ones we have not, immediately infiltrated the various unions at their conception. The iniquity and corruption therein has since blossomed into the most complex web of criminality that we see in the United States and across the world to this day. Keep in mind that alongside the growth of the Zerilli-Tocco leadership, Jimmy Hoffa was running a parallel path to success around the same time, incorporating mafias from several cities into the Teamsters Union, which represented the freight drivers and warehouse workers. Just like Prohibition was able to unite various mafias from across the United States by way of interstate commerce, and all of the Americas for that matter, the Teamsters Union was primed for corruption and would go on to not only organize freight drivers and warehouse workers, but nearly every industry under the sun, and it still does. Fun fact, James P. Hoffa, Jimmy Hoffa's son, is the current sitting president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. I don't want to spend all of our time talking about Jimmy Hoffa today. It'll spoil all the fun for our spotlight for him later on. But I do want to make clear that he was extremely involved with Detroit Partnership leadership, as well as leadership across the country in several mafias, almost all of them really. And today I do want to focus specifically on Detroit, but just note that Jimmy Hoffa's influence expanded past the city. It would seem that Anthony Tony Jack Giacolone, a relative of the late Sam Catalanote, who had worked his way into a leadership role under Peter Licavoli and later Zerilli himself, would be a primary contact for Hoffa in the Detroit Partnership. Giacolone was one of what came to be known as the big men, who were partnership leaders that sat directly beneath the Council of Five and would be the group of men from which the council would replace itself in the partnership. The partnership structure was different than the typical Cosa Nostra structure and consisted of a ruling council, consisting of a boss, underboss, and consigliere status, the big men, who acted as administrators and also underbosses, the chiefs or capos, the lieutenants, soldiers but with more power, think of like an English baron or perhaps a viscount, and section leaders who had specifically enumerated roles in specific areas of the partnership's overall criminal empire. This was an extraordinary organizational system and is even further buffered by the kinship rules. This meant that any indictments or convictions would not blow up the entire structure, but rather only caused controlled explosions in certain sections of the structure that could be more easily repaired. It's probably the most impressive and most effective mafia structure in the country. Now, I know many of you are probably going to rush to the comments to jump my bones about that, but I will remind you that the Detroit Partnership, unlike almost all of the other mafias we've covered, is still fully in operation today. The partnership's only weakness is that it's limited in size, but maybe that too is a benefit. It has a built-in checks and balances system that doesn't allow it to expand beyond a certain point. Mafias, like so many small and medium businesses, die in growth, but the Detroit partnership never has this problem. The partnership structure itself, coupled with Zerilli's hard insistence on staying out of the public eye, meant that the partnership enjoyed a golden era for over 4 decades, an unprecedented length of success, with the highest point, of course, being between the late 40s to the early 60s. During the 1940s, Zerilli, Tocco, Prizziola, and other major players in the partnership would build themselves mansions all near one another in Grosse Pointe Park, east of Detroit. This would later be known as the Compound. Peter Licavoli, who was really the main branch by which the partnership operated with outside families, would push the partnership too far sometime in the 1940s. It is likely because of his enthusiasm to work with others, which served him well in the establishment of the partnership, but was now becoming too hawkish in his desire for outside involvement for the rest of the partnership's taste. Specifically, Licavoli was getting too involved in Ohio, specifically Cleveland, Toledo, and Youngstown. While this did cause tension in the partnership, it seemed to result in an amicable separation from them. Licavoli would then move to Tucson, Arizona, and establish his own mafia network from there. The Licavoli link to the partnership is still present today, though, because Licavoli and Zerilli were related by marriage prior to the separation. At the very pinnacle of the partnership's success, they were making over $150 million per year. The Hazel Park Raceway was opened in 1949, and this horse track would become a major source of partnership income. Hazel Park was also a sort of gift from Zerilli and Tocco to their sons Anthony Zerilli and Jack Tocco. The younger Zerilli and Tocco would run Hazel Park and several of their other operations together as a form of grooming them to take over after their fathers. In 1957, Vito Genovese organized the Appalachian meeting at the home of Joseph Barbara in Appalachian, New York. It is widely believed that Joe Zerilli was supposed to attend. The FBI had airport and hotel information on Zerilli that proved he was in New York at the time. Rumor has it that while he was on his way to the meeting, his driver, Anthony Giacalone, pulled over upon hearing radio police reports that there was a raid on Joseph Barbara's home and spared the Detroit leader from the unfortunate fate that many other mob leaders suffered as a result of attending that same meeting. Sometimes it pays to be fashionably late. It's reported that by the early 1960s, Zerilli was ready to pass the torch, but it was deemed too early by leadership as they did not think that their sons were ready to handle the responsibility of the entire partnership. During 1963, the McClellan or Valachi hearings took place, and Joseph Valachi would give up Zerilli's name along with nearly everyone else. Fortunately for Zerilli, although his name would now forever be linked with mafia activity and the partnership would be given the name the Zerilli family, no real issues came from it. In the case of the partnership, there was so much marriage and relation in the group that calling it the Zerilli family was probably pretty accurate. In that same year of 1963, both William Tocco and Angelo Melli would suffer from several health problems and semi-retire and divide their time between Detroit and Florida. Joseph Zerilli, seemingly wishing to do the same, would make his son Anthony Zerilli acting boss in 1965. Angelo Melli would die of natural causes at the age of 72 on December 1st, 1969. Bill Tocco would die in Bon Secours, now Beaumont Hospital in Miami, Florida, on May 28, 1972. Joe Zerilli knew that his time was running out and he needed to pass the partnership on to the next generation. Anthony Zerilli would run into legal problems after he was sent to prison in 1974 for attempting to gain secret illegal interests in a couple of Las Vegas casinos. Despite his insistence on his innocence, Anthony Zerilli would later insist that he was extremely involved, although not really. Take his words with a grain of salt because he's trying to walk a very fine line while both maintaining his innocence and cashing in on his mafia name and involvement. He had the following to say: "I know many people who are involved in those activities, most of whom are related to me. But regarding Jimmy Hoffa's promotion to president of the Teamsters Union, he said this: because I got Hoffa elected to the Teamsters presidency, he owed me big. Nobody borrowed any money without it going through us. It simply didn't happen. Was there anything illegal about this? Not really." Again, take that for what it's worth, but there's no doubt in my mind that he was acting boss and a major decision maker in the partnership. After Anthony Zerilli's fall in 1974, Jack Tocco, Bill Tocco's son, would take over as acting boss. On July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa would disappear, seemingly indefinitely because his body was never recovered and no one has ever been charged for the crime. According to Mafia lore, Hoffa and Joe Zerilli worked closely together, but their relationship went south when Hoffa found out that his wife was having an affair with partnership chief Tony Cimini. Hoffa had asked that Zerilli do something about it, but when Zerilli did nothing, Hoffa arranged for Cimini to be arrested for fraud. Hoffa would disappear shortly thereafter. By the way, it was known that he was supposed to meet with two men directly prior to his disappearance, and these were Genovese family New Jersey capo Anthony Provenzano and Zerilli's trusted administrator, Anthony Giacolone. Papa was scheduled to meet with them that day at 2 p.m. Giacolone and Provenzano insist on their innocence and insist that the meeting was never supposed to happen. Most historians believe that they're the prime suspects for the disappearance, but nobody's ever been found, and no one has ever been charged. Joseph Zerilli would succumb to his health problems at the age of 79 on October 30th, 1977. Giacomo Jack Tocco, who had been serving as Zerilli's acting boss, would now step into the role of boss. However, Papa John Prizziola would serve as the official boss for the remaining 2 years of his life. Prizziola was the last of the original partnership leaders and would officially pass leadership to Jack Tocco in April of 1979, an event that was apparently caught on FBI tape, but I have had absolutely zero luck in finding it. Prizziola would then die on April 14, 1979. Jack Tocco would lead the partnership until 2014, when he died of natural causes at the age of 87 on July 14, 2014. After Tocco, Jackie the Kid Giacolone, nephew of Anthony Giacolone, would become boss and remains boss to this day. His nickname was given to him by his Uncle Tony, who apparently loved westerns. Jackie the Kid Giacolone almost had to pass leadership on to someone else in June of 2021, when he was nearly nabbed for not paying his income taxes. However, on June 4, 2021, he avoided jail time by sending a $12,000 check to the feds for the crime, even though he has allegedly not paid income taxes since 2004. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Racket Reviews, wrapping up our conversation about the history of the Detroit Partnership. I know it's been a bumpy ride, but I hope that you'll walk away from this mini-series knowing a lot more about one of America's most active mafia groups. Make sure to let me know in the comment section below or on Facebook and Twitter what you think about the Detroit Partnership. Also, don't forget to utilize the comment section and social media to let me know who or what you would like to see covered next. I always love hearing from you, and I'm always happy to investigate. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click notifications to get more Mafia content sent directly to your sub box. Ciao!